The Montana Territory dawn broke cold and gray on October 15, 1876, as Daniel Bear McKenzie crouched behind a fallen log, his rifle trained on what he believed was an elk, moving through the morning mist. The experienced hunter had been tracking the animal for 2 days, and his family's winter food supply depended on making this shot count. With his wife Catherine expecting their first child and winter approaching fast, Bear couldn't afford to return to their remote cabin empty-handed. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales from the Old West that will challenge your heart and remind you of the power of redemption. Bear had earned his nickname through 15 years of living in the wilderness, first as a mountain man trapping beaver, then as a guide for wagon trains, and finally as a settler trying to carve out a life for his young family. At 34, he was a man who had learned to read the land like a book, to survive in conditions that would kill most civilized folks, and to make the hard decisions that frontier life demanded. The shape moving through the trees was about the right size for a bull elk, and Bear could make out what appeared to be antlers silhouetted against the gray sky. His family's cabin was a full day's ride from the nearest settlement, and their winter meat stores were dangerously low. Catherine had been rationing their food for weeks, though she tried to hide it from Bear. Bear steadied his breathing, aligned his sights, and squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack of his rifle echoed through the forest, and he watched the figure drop behind a cluster of boulders. But instead of the silence he expected after a clean kill, Bear heard something that made his blood run cold, a very human cry of pain. "Jesus Christ," Bear whispered, his rifle dropping to his side as he realized what he had done. Bear ran toward the sound, his heart pounding with dread. When he reached the boulders, he found not a fallen elk, but a young Crow warrior, probably no more than 20 years old, lying on his side with blood streaming from a wound in his upper arm. The antlers that Bear had seen were actually feathers in the young man's hair, and what he had taken for the brown hide of an elk was actually the warrior's buckskin clothing. The young Crow was conscious but in obvious pain, his dark eyes filled with shock and confusion as he looked up at Bear. He was trying to reach for a bough that had fallen several feet away when he saw Bear approaching, but the wound in his arm made movement difficult. "Don't move," Bear said, dropping his rifle and raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. I need to look at that wound." The warrior spoke in Crow, words that Bear didn't understand, but whose tone clearly conveyed suspicion and fear. Bear had learned some basic signs from his years on the frontier, and he attempted to communicate his peaceful intentions through gestures. "I thought you were an elk," Bear said, knowing the warrior probably couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey his regret. "I'm sorry. Let me help you." The wound was serious, but not fatal. Bear's bullet had passed through the fleshy part of the warrior's upper arm, missing the bone but causing significant bleeding. Without immediate medical attention, the young man could lose enough blood to die, or the wound could become infected and kill him more slowly. Bear knew he was in a dangerous situation. If this warrior had friends nearby, they would likely assume Bear had attacked him deliberately. A wounded Crow warrior found with a white man would be seen as evidence of aggression, and Bear would be lucky to die quickly. But he also knew he couldn't leave an injured man to die from a wound he had caused, even if it had been an accident. "My name is Bear," he said, pointing to himself and speaking slowly. "I'm going to help you." The warrior studied Bear's face for a long moment, perhaps trying to determine whether this was some kind of trap. Finally, he spoke a single word, "Dakota." Bear assumed this was the young man's name and nodded. "Dakota. Good. Now let me look at this wound." Bear had field-dressed hundreds of animals and had treated his share of human injuries. During his years as a wagon train guide, he knew how to stop bleeding and clean wounds, skills that were essential for anyone living far from medical care. Using water from his canteen and strips torn from his own shirt, Bear cleaned the wound as gently as he could while Dakota gritted his teeth against the pain. The bullet had made a clean passage through the arm, which was fortunate, but the bleeding needed to be controlled quickly. As Bear worked, he became aware that they weren't alone. He could feel eyes watching him from the forest, and he knew that Dakota's companions were likely nearby. trying to determine what was happening and whether Bear represented a threat. "Dakota," Bear said, looking directly into the young warrior's eyes. "Are your friends out there? Can you call to them? Tell them I'm helping you?" Dakota seemed to understand Bear's meaning, if not his words. After a moment of consideration, he called out in Crow, his voice carrying clearly through the forest. Bear couldn't understand what he was saying, but he hoped Dakota was explaining that Bear was providing medical aid, rather than continuing an attack. Don't miss what happens when honor meets suspicion in the wilderness. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to see how this act of conscience unfolds. 3 Crow warriors emerged from the trees, their weapons ready, but not immediately threatening. They spoke rapidly with Dakota, who responded at length, occasionally gesturing toward Bear and his medical efforts. Bear continued working on the wound, trying to project calm competence while being very aware that his life hung in the balance. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, could result in his death. But he had caused this injury, and he was determined to do everything in his power to help heal it. The oldest of the 3 warriors, a man of perhaps 40 with gray streaking his black hair, approached closer and studied Bear's work. He spoke to Dakota again, and this time Bear caught a few words he recognized from his frontier travels. White eyes, shot, help. Bear looked up at the older warrior and tried to communicate through the few Crow words he knew, combined with sign language. "Accident," he signed. "Thought elk. Sorry. Help." The older warrior, who seemed to be a leader among the group, watched Bear complete the bandaging of Dakota's arm. When Bear had finished, he stepped back and raised his hands again, showing that he was no longer armed and posed no threat. Dakota said something to the leader, speaking earnestly and at length. Bear could see that some kind of debate was taking place among the 4 Crow warriors, with glances and gestures directed toward him throughout their conversation. Finally, the leader stepped forward and studied Bear's face intently. When he spoke, it was in heavily accented but understandable English. "You shoot Dakota by mistake." Bear nodded emphatically. "Yes, I thought he was an elk. I would never shoot a man deliberately unless he was trying to harm me or my family." "You help him." "Why?" "Because I wounded him," Bear replied simply. "A man takes responsibility for his actions." The leader considered this for a moment, then spoke again to his companions in Crow. The discussion that followed was animated, with different warriors clearly expressing different opinions about what should be done with Bear. "I am Chief Gray Wolf," the leader finally said to Bear. "Dakota is my nephew. You hurt him, but you also help him. This makes difficult decision." Bear understood the dilemma from the Crow perspective. He was a white man who had shot one of their people. The fact that it was an accident and that he had provided medical aid complicated the situation, but it didn't necessarily absolve him of responsibility. "I understand," Bear said. "What do you want me to do?" Gray Wolf studied Bear for another long moment. "You have family?" "Yes, a wife. We're expecting our first child." "Where?" Bear hesitated. Revealing the location of his cabin could put Catherine in danger if the Crow decided his family should pay for his mistake. But lying seemed equally dangerous and dishonorable. "1 day's ride south," he said finally. "A cabin by Willow Creek." Gray Wolf nodded slowly. "I know this place." "You live alone there?" "Just my wife and me. We take you with us," Gray Wolf decided. "Our medicine man will treat Dakota's wound properly. You will stay until we know he will live." Bear realized this was probably the best outcome he could hope for under the circumstances. The Crow were essentially taking him prisoner, but they weren't killing him outright, and they were ensuring that Dakota received proper medical care. "What about my wife?" Bear asked. "She'll worry if I don't return." "That is not our concern now," Gray Wolf replied. "You shot Dakota. You must answer for this, accident or not." As the group prepared to travel to the Crow camp, Bear found himself thinking about Catherine waiting at their cabin. She would expect him back by evening, and when he didn't return, she would begin to worry. By the second day, she would be frightened. If something happened to him, she would be left alone and pregnant in the wilderness with winter approaching. But Bear also understood that he had created this situation through his careless shot. The right thing to do was to ensure that Dakota recovered fully from his wound, regardless of the cost to himself. Dakota was able to walk with assistance, though the movement clearly caused him pain. The group moved slowly through the forest, with Bear walking in the middle of the formation, essentially under guard, but not bound or mistreated. As they traveled, Bear noticed the skill with which the Crow warriors moved through the landscape. They left virtually no trail, communicated through subtle hand signals, and seemed to know exactly where they were going despite the dense forest and lack of obvious landmarks. After several hours of walking, they reached the Crow camp, a collection of teepees arranged in a circle near a clear stream. Bear estimated there were perhaps 50 people in the camp, including women, children, and elders. The arrival of the group with a wounded warrior and a white prisoner caused immediate commotion. People gathered around, speaking rapidly in Crow, while studying Bear with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Grey Wolf called out, apparently explaining the situation to the assembled tribe. Bear caught enough words and gestures to understand that Grey Wolf was telling the story of the accidental shooting and Bear's subsequent aid to Dakota. An elderly woman who Bear assumed was the medicine woman approached and examined Dakota's wound. She spoke with Grey Wolf, nodding approvingly at Bear's field treatment before leading Dakota toward one of the larger teepees. "You did good work," Grey Wolf told Bear. "Medicine woman says Dakota will heal if wound stays clean. I'm glad." Bear replied honestly, "I've been worried about him." Grey Wolf studied Bear's face again. "Most white men would run after shooting Indian. You stayed to help. Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Bear answered. "I caused the injury. I had to try to fix it. And now you are afraid." Bear considered the question carefully. "I'm afraid for my wife, not for myself, but I understand why you brought me here." Grey Wolf nodded. "We will decide what to do with you after we know Dakota will live. Until then, you are our guest." Bear understood that guest was a polite way of saying prisoner, but he also sensed that his willingness to help Dakota had earned him some measure of respect among the Crow. Whether that would be enough to keep him alive remained to be seen. As evening fell over the camp, Bear found himself sitting by a fire, sharing a meal with Grey Wolf and several other warriors. The conversation was limited by language barriers, but Bear began to get a sense of these people as individuals rather than just Indians, as he had always thought of them. They were people with families, concerns, and hopes much like his own. They worried about their children, planned for winter, and told stories around the fire. The realization that he had almost killed one of their young men through his carelessness weighed heavily on Bear's conscience, but he had also learned something important about himself. When faced with the choice between running from his mistake or taking responsibility for it, he had chosen responsibility, even knowing it might cost him his life. Now he could only wait and hope that Dakota would recover fully, and that his act of conscience would be enough to save not just his own life, but his ability to return to Catherine and their unborn child. 3 days had passed since Bear's arrival at the Crow camp, and Dakota's condition was improving steadily under the care of the medicine woman, whose name Bear had learned was White Dove. The young warrior's fever had broken. The wound showed no signs of infection, and he was able to move his arm with only moderate pain. But Bear's own situation remained precarious, suspended between guest and prisoner while the tribe debated his fate. If this story of honor and unexpected friendship is gripping you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more incredible tales from the frontier. Bear had been allowed to move freely around the camp during the day, though he was always under the watchful eyes of Grey Wolf's warriors. He had used the time to learn more about Crow culture and to demonstrate his usefulness to the tribe. His skills as a hunter and his knowledge of the surrounding territory had not gone unnoticed. On the morning of the 4th day, Grey Wolf approached Bear with news that changed everything. "Dakota is strong," Grey Wolf announced. "White Dove says he will have full use of his arm. The wound heals clean." Bear felt a wave of relief wash over him. "I'm very glad to hear that. He's a tough young man." "Yes, he is," Grey Wolf agreed. "But now we have new problem. Our scouts report soldiers coming from the east. Many soldiers. They move toward our camp." Bear felt his stomach drop. military expeditions against Native American tribes had become increasingly common as white settlement expanded westward. If soldiers were approaching the Crow camp, it likely meant trouble for everyone involved. "How many soldiers?" Bear asked. "Scout says maybe 60, 70 men, with wagons and horses. They move like they know where we are." Bear understood the implication immediately. A force that size, moving with apparent purpose toward the Crow camp, suggested either a punitive expedition or a preemptive strike based on intelligence about the tribe's location. "Why are you telling me this?" Bear asked. Gray Wolf studied Bear's face carefully. "Because maybe you know why soldiers come. Maybe your people called them when you did not return home." The possibility hadn't occurred to Bear, but now that Gray Wolf mentioned it, it made sense. If Catherine had become desperate enough, she might have ridden to the nearest settlement seeking help. The story of a missing husband, possibly captured by Indians, could easily have prompted a military response. "My wife might have sought help if she thought I was in trouble," Bear admitted. "But I never told her to call for soldiers. I wouldn't want anyone to be hurt because of my mistake." Gray Wolf nodded grimly. "Soldiers do not come to talk. They come to fight. Women and children will die if they attack our camp." Bear felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again. If his failure to return home had indeed prompted this military expedition, then he was partially responsible for the danger now facing the Crow camp. "What can I do to help?" Bear asked. Gray Wolf seemed surprised by the question. "You would help us against your own people." "These aren't my people," Bear replied firmly. "I don't know these soldiers, and I didn't ask them to come here. If they attack this camp, innocent people will die, including Dakota, whom I wounded. I can't let that happen." Gray Wolf called several of his warriors together and spoke with them rapidly in Crow. Bear could see that his offer to help was causing debate among the group. Some seemed to view it as an opportunity, while others clearly suspected a trap. After the discussion, Gray Wolf turned back to Bear. "If you truly want to help, you can try to stop soldiers before they attack. You are white man, they might listen to you." Bear nodded. "I'll try. But what if they don't listen? What if they're here on orders to attack regardless of what I say? Then we fight." Gray Wolf said simply. "But maybe you can prevent much death." Dakota, who had been listening to the conversation from nearby, struggled to his feet and approached the group. His arm was still in a sling made from soft leather, but he moved with determination. He spoke to Gray Wolf and Crow, gesturing toward Bear and then toward himself. Whatever he was saying clearly surprised and pleased his uncle. "Dakota says he will come with you to speak to soldiers," Gray Wolf translated. "He says white soldiers will see that he lives, that you cared for him, that we are not enemies." Bear looked at the young warrior with admiration. "That's brave of him, but dangerous. If shooting starts, he could be hurt again." Dakota says his arm was wounded by accident, but his honor is not wounded. He wants to help prevent war between our peoples. Bear felt a deep respect for the young man he had accidentally shot. Dakota was willing to risk his life to help prevent a conflict that Bear's own actions might have triggered. "All right," Bear decided. "We'll go together and try to talk to the soldiers. But we'll need to approach them carefully. Military units in Indian territory tend to shoot first and ask questions later." Gray Wolf provided Bear with his rifle and personal belongings, which had been kept safe during his stay in the camp. He also gave Bear a white piece of cloth to use as a flag of truce. "If soldiers do not listen," Gray Wolf warned, "if they attack anyway, we will defend ourselves. We have moved women and children to safe place, but warriors will fight." Bear understood that Gray Wolf was telling him this was likely a one-way mission. If the military commander was determined to attack the Crow camp, Bear and Dakota would probably not survive their attempt at diplomacy. The tension builds as two former enemies become allies. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see how courage and honor face the ultimate test. As Bear and Dakota prepared to leave the camp, White Dove approached them with additional medical supplies and a blessing spoken in Crow. Several other tribal members also came forward to wish them well, including children who had initially been afraid of Bear but had come to accept his presence. The ride toward the approaching soldiers took most of the morning. Bear and Dakota traveled carefully, staying alert for signs of the military column while also watching for advance scouts who might shoot them before they could explain their mission. They found the soldiers camped in a meadow about 10 miles from the Crow camp. Bear counted approximately 70 men, just as the Crow scouts had reported. The unit appeared to be a mix of regular cavalry and volunteer militia, commanded by a captain whose tent flew the flag of the Territorial Army, remember. Bear told Dakota as they approached the edge of the camp, "Let me do most of the talking." At first, some of these soldiers might not react well to hearing a Crow warrior speak English. Dakota nodded, understanding the prejudices they would likely face. Bear tied the white cloth to his rifle barrel and rode slowly toward the military camp with Dakota beside him. They had covered about half the distance when sentries spotted them and raised the alarm. "Halt! Identify yourselves," shouted a sergeant, raising his rifle. "Daniel McKenzie," Bear called back, keeping his hands visible. "I'm a settler from Willow Creek. I need to speak with your commanding officer." "What about the Indian?" "He's with me. We're here under a flag of truce." The sergeant kept his rifle trained on them while another soldier ran to fetch the captain. Within minutes, a tall man in his 40s approached, his uniform marking him as a career military officer. "I'm Captain James Morrison," the officer announced. "Are you the missing hunter whose wife reported him captured by hostile Indians?" Bear felt his heart sink. His suspicions had been correct. Catherine's worry had prompted this military expedition. "I'm Daniel McKenzie, and yes, my wife is Catherine McKenzie of Willow Creek, but I wasn't captured by hostile Indians. I accidentally wounded this young man while hunting, and I've been staying with his tribe to make sure he recovered properly." Captain Morrison studied Bear and Dakota with obvious skepticism. "You expect me to believe that you're staying voluntarily with a band of Crow warriors?" "It's the truth, Captain. I wounded Dakota by accident, mistaking him for an elk in the morning mist. His uncle, Chief Gray Wolf, brought me to their camp to ensure I took responsibility for what I had done. And now I'm here to tell you that these people are not hostile. They're a peaceful band trying to prepare for winter. If you attack their camp, you'll be killing innocent women and children." Captain Morrison turned his attention to Dakota, who had remained silent during the exchange. "Can this Indian speak?" "English. My name is Dakota," the young warrior said with dignity. "I speak your language, and I am here to tell you that Bear McKenzie speaks truth. He shot me by accident, then risked his life to help me. My people have treated him with honor because he acted with honor." Morrison seemed taken aback by Dakota's articulate English, an obvious education. "Where did you learn to speak English so well?" "From missionaries who lived with our tribe for 3 years, Dakota replied. "They taught me your language and your customs. I know that not all white men are enemies, just as not all Indians are savage." Bear could see that Morrison was genuinely considering what they had told him, but he could also see the pressure the captain was under from his men and from the political situation that had prompted this expedition. "Captain," Bear said, "I understand you came here because my wife was worried about me, but I'm asking you not to attack that camp. Let me return to my wife and explain what happened. There's no need for bloodshed." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. McKenzie, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I have orders. There have been increasing reports of Indian raids in this territory. My superiors want a show of force to discourage future attacks. But these people haven't raided anyone," Bear protested. "They're just trying to survive." "Maybe so," Morrison said, "but my orders are clear. I'm to establish military dominance in this area and ensure that no hostile bands are operating near white settlements." Bear felt his heart sinking as he realized that logic and truth might not be enough to prevent the coming tragedy. The captain seemed like a reasonable man, but he was trapped by orders and expectations that demanded action regardless of circumstances. It was then that Dakota stepped forward and did something that surprised everyone present. "Captain Morrison," Dakota said formally, "I challenge your strongest warrior to single combat. If I win, you leave our people in peace. If I lose, we will submit to whatever you decide." The challenge sent a murmur through the gathered soldiers. Single combat between representatives of opposing forces was an ancient tradition, respected even in modern military culture. Morrison looked shocked. "You're wounded. You can't seriously be proposing to fight." "I am wounded but not defeated," Dakota replied, "and I am fighting for the lives of my people. That gives a man strength beyond his injuries." Bear realized that Dakota was offering the soldiers a way to demonstrate their superiority. Without massacring an entire village, it was a desperate gamble, but it might be the only chance to prevent a bloodbath. "Captain," Bear said, "this is an honorable solution. Your men get to prove their fighting ability, and innocent lives are spared." Morrison considered the proposal, clearly torn between his orders and his conscience. The decision he made would determine whether the day ended in honor or in tragedy. Captain Morrison studied Dakota's challenge proposal for several long minutes, while his soldiers gathered around, murmuring among themselves about this unexpected turn of events. Bear could see the captain weighing military protocol against the opportunity to resolve the situation without a massacre, while Dakota stood with quiet dignity despite his wounded arm and the overwhelming odds against him. Join us for the incredible conclusion of this tale that proves honor can triumph over hatred. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of courage and redemption. "This is highly irregular," Morrison finally said. "I have orders to establish military dominance in this region, not to engage in single combat with individual warriors, but—" "Captain," Bear interjected, "you also have the discretion to accomplish your mission with minimal bloodshed. A victory in single combat would demonstrate military superiority just as effectively as an attack on the village, and it would save the lives of innocent women and children." Morrison looked around at his men, gauging their reaction to the proposal. Bear could see that many of the soldiers were intrigued by the idea. Single combat had an appeal that went beyond mere military strategy. It offered a test of individual courage and skill that resonated with men who had chosen the warrior's path. "If I were to accept this challenge," Morrison said carefully, "what guarantee do I have that the tribe would honor the outcome?" "You have my word," Dakota replied, "and the word of Bear McKenzie, who has lived among us and knows our ways. We honor our agreements, Captain Morrison." "And if you win?" Morrison asked. "What then?" "Then you return to your superiors and report that you found no hostile Indians in this territory." Dakota said simply, "You tell them the truth, that the Crow band you encountered is peaceful and poses no threat to white settlements." Bear could see Morrison struggling with the decision. The captain was clearly a man of conscience, but he was also a career military officer with responsibilities to his superiors and his men. "Captain," one of Morrison's sergeants said quietly, "the men are talking. They think it's a fair challenge. Better than killing women and children for no good reason." Morrison nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll accept your challenge, but with conditions. If you lose, your entire band submits to relocation to the reservation. If you win, we'll withdraw and report that no hostile activity was found in this area." "Agreed," Dakota said immediately. "And who will represent our side?" Morrison asked. "I will, sir," volunteered Sergeant Patrick O'Malley, a large Irish-American soldier who had a reputation as the strongest man in the unit. "If the lad wants a fight, I'll give him one." Bear looked at O'Malley with concern. The sergeant was at least 6 inches taller than Dakota and probably outweighed him by 50 pounds. Moreover, Dakota was fighting with one arm still healing from a gunshot wound. "Sergeant O'Malley is an experienced fighter," Morrison warned Dakota. "Are you certain you want to proceed with this?" Dakota nodded firmly. "I am certain." "Then we'll make this official," Morrison decided. "Single combat between Sergeant O'Malley and the Crow warrior Dakota. The winner determines the fate of the Crow band. Combat continues until one participant yields or is unable to continue." As the soldiers formed a circle for the fight, Bear pulled Dakota aside for a private conversation. "You don't have to do this," Bear said urgently. "Your arm isn't fully healed, and O'Malley is a powerful man. There has to be another way." Dakota smiled grimly. "There's no other way, my friend. If I do not fight, soldiers will attack our camp. Women and children will die. This is the only chance to save them. But if you lose, your people will be forced onto the reservation. If I lose while fighting for them, at least they will live, Dakota replied. That is more important than where they live. Bear felt a deep admiration for the young warrior's courage and nobility. Dakota was willing to sacrifice himself for his people, just as he had been willing to risk his life to prevent a war between their peoples. The ultimate test of courage is about to begin. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to witness this incredible showdown between honor and might. The circle was formed, with soldiers creating a ring about 20 feet in diameter. Sergeant O'Malley stripped to the waist, revealing a powerfully muscled torso marked with scars from previous fights. Dakota removed his shirt as well, and Bear could see the fresh bandage on his arm where the bullet wound was still healing. Gentlemen, Captain Morrison announced, this is to be a fair fight. No weapons, no interference from spectators. The combat continues until one man yields or is unable to continue. O'Malley stepped forward and extended his hand to Dakota. Nothing personal, lad, but I've got my orders. Dakota shook the sergeant's hand. I understand. You fight for your people, as I fight for mine. The two men stepped back and began to circle each other. O'Malley moved with the confidence of a man who had won many fights through superior strength and experience. Dakota moved more carefully, favoring his wounded arm but staying light on his feet. O'Malley made the first move, lunging forward with a powerful right hand that would have ended the fight if it had connected. But Dakota was quicker, slipping to the side and allowing the sergeant's momentum to carry him past. For the next few minutes, the fight continued with O'Malley pressing forward aggressively, while Dakota used his speed and agility to avoid the worst of the sergeant's attacks. But Bear could see that Dakota was already tiring, and his wounded arm was limiting his ability to defend himself effectively. O'Malley finally managed to land a solid blow to Dakota's ribs, sending the warrior staggering backward. The sergeant pressed his advantage, landing another punch to Dakota's shoulder that made him cry out in pain. Give up, lad, O'Malley said, not unkindly. You've got heart, but you're hurt and outmatched. But Dakota straightened up and shook his head. I do not yield. The fight resumed with O'Malley now clearly in control. He landed several more blows, each one doing more damage to the already wounded warrior. Blood was flowing from a cut above Dakota's eye, and Bear could see that he was struggling to stay on his feet. It was then that something extraordinary happened. Just as it appeared that Dakota was about to fall, he seemed to find a reserve of strength and determination that transcended his physical limitations. Moving with sudden speed and precision, he managed to get inside O'Malley's guard and land a series of quick, accurate strikes to the sergeant's midsection. O'Malley grunted and stepped back, surprised by the sudden reversal. For the next several minutes, the fight became more evenly matched, with both men giving and receiving punishment. But Bear could see that Dakota was running on pure willpower now. His wound had reopened and was bleeding through the bandage. His movements were becoming increasingly unsteady, and his breathing was labored. Finally, O'Malley landed a powerful uppercut that sent Dakota to the ground. The warrior tried to get back up, but his legs wouldn't support him. He made it to his knees, then collapsed again. That's enough, Captain Morrison called out. Sergeant O'Malley wins. Bear started to move toward Dakota, but the warrior held up his hand. Wait, Dakota said, his voice barely audible. I have not yielded, son. You can't even stand up, Morrison said with something approaching respect. You fought bravely, but it's over. Dakota struggled once more to his feet, swaying dangerously, but somehow managing to stay upright. I do not yield, he repeated. Bear could see that continuing the fight would likely kill Dakota, but he also understood that the warrior's honor would not allow him to surrender while he still drew breath. It was then that Sergeant O'Malley did something that surprised everyone present. Instead of pressing his attack, he stepped back and lowered his hands. Captain, O'Malley said loudly, I can't fight this man anymore. What do you mean, Sergeant? I mean he's the bravest son of a bitch I've ever met. And if I hit him again, I'll be killing a better man than myself, O'Malley replied. I withdraw from the fight. A murmur of surprise ran through the circle of soldiers. Morrison looked stunned by his sergeant's decision. "Sergeant, you were winning. The outcome was decided." "No, sir," O'Malley said firmly. "The outcome isn't decided until one man yields or can't continue. This warrior can't continue. But he won't yield. That makes him the winner in my book." Captain Morrison looked around at his men, reading their faces. Bear could see that O'Malley's words had resonated with the soldiers. They had come expecting to fight savages, but instead they had witnessed a display of courage and honor that had earned their respect. "Very well," Morrison said finally. "The challenge is declared a draw. Both fighters have shown extraordinary courage and determination." "What does that mean for the tribe?" Bear asked. Morrison considered the question. For a long moment. "It means we'll return to headquarters and report that we encountered a peaceful band of Crow Indians who pose no threat to white settlements. There will be no attack on the village." Bear felt a wave of relief wash over him. Dakota's courage had achieved what negotiation couldn't. It had saved his people from attack while preserving their freedom. As Bear helped tend to Dakota's injuries, Captain Morrison approached them. "Mr. McKenzie," the captain said, "I want you to know that this has been an education for me. I came here expecting to find hostile savages, but instead I found people of honor and courage." "They're just people, Captain," Bear replied. "Good. People trying to take care of their families and live their lives in peace." Morrison nodded. "I see that now. And you, young warrior," he said to Dakota, "you fought with more courage than most men could manage. You have my respect." Dakota, despite his injuries, managed to sit up straighter. "And you have mine, Captain. Your sergeant is a man of honor." O'Malley approached and knelt beside Dakota. "Lad, I've been fighting for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did today. You're tougher than any man has a right to be. We all fight for what we believe in." Dakota replied, "You fight for your country, I fight for my people. That makes us brothers, not enemies." This incredible display of honor and courage is reaching its most powerful moment. Subscribe to our channel and share this story with others who need to hear about the power of doing what's right. The journey back to the Crow camp was slow, with Dakota needing frequent rest stops due to his injuries from both the gunshot wound and the fight, but his spirits were high, knowing that his sacrifice had saved his people from attack and preserved their freedom. When they reached the camp, the entire tribe came out to greet them. Gray Wolf listened intently as Dakota recounted the events at the military camp, translating for the assembled crowd. When he finished, a cheer went up from the gathered Crow people. "You have brought great honor to our people," Gray Wolf told Dakota. "Your courage will be remembered in our stories for generations." But Dakota shook his head. "The honor belongs to Bear McKenzie and Sergeant O'Malley. Bear could have run away after wounding me, but he stayed to help, and O'Malley could have continued fighting until I was dead. But he chose mercy over victory." Captain Morrison had accompanied them back to the camp, wanting to see for himself the people he had been ordered to attack. What he found was a peaceful community going about their daily lives, women cooking and caring for children, elders telling stories, young people learning traditional skills. "This isn't what I expected," Morrison confided to Bear. "I was told these people were dangerous raiders threatening white settlements. Sometimes the truth gets lost in fear and prejudice," Bear replied. "These people just want to live their lives in peace." As evening fell, the Crow held a ceremony to honor the day's events. Bear found himself in the unusual position of being formally adopted into the tribe as a brother, a recognition of his willingness to risk his life to help Dakota and prevent a war. "You are no longer just white man who shot Dakota," Gray Wolf announced. "You are Bear who stands for justice, brother to all Crow people." The ceremony was moving, but Bear's thoughts kept returning to Catherine. He had been away for over a week now, and she would be frantic with worry, especially being pregnant and alone. "I need to get back to my wife," Bear told Gray Wolf. "She'll be terrified about what happened to me." "Of course," Gray Wolf agreed. "But first, we want to give you something." The chief led Bear to where a magnificent horse was waiting, a spotted pony with intelligent eyes and a proud bearing. "This is Wind Runner," Gray Wolf said. "He is fastest horse in our herd, and smartest. He will carry you home safely and serve you well." Bear was overwhelmed by the gift. "I can't accept this. It's too valuable." "You gave us something more valuable than any horse," Grey Wolf replied. "You gave us peace. You risked your life for people who were strangers to you. Wind Runner is small payment for such courage." Captain Morrison approached the group. "Mr. McKenzie, I'd like to escort you home, if you don't mind. I need to speak with your wife and explain what happened. She deserves to know that her husband is a hero." The ride back to Bear's cabin took most of the next day. Captain Morrison had brought a small escort, and their presence ensured safe passage through territory where tensions between whites and Indians remained high. When they finally reached the cabin by Willow Creek, Catherine came running out, tears streaming down her face. She threw herself into Bear's arms, holding him tightly while sobbing with relief. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost you forever." "I'm here," Bear said, holding her close. "I'm safe, and I'm never leaving you again." Captain Morrison respectfully waited for their reunion to conclude before introducing himself and explaining the events of the past week. Catherine listened in amazement as the captain described Bear's courage in caring for Dakota and his willingness to risk his life to prevent a war. "Your husband prevented what could have been a massacre," Morrison told her. "His actions saved dozens of innocent lives and may have prevented a wider conflict between our peoples." That evening, as they sat by their fireplace, Catherine asked Bear to tell her everything that had happened. He recounted the accidental shooting, his time in the Crow camp, Dakota's incredible courage, and the resolution that had saved both peoples from tragedy. "I'm proud of you," Catherine said when he finished. "You did the right thing, even though it was dangerous." "I almost got you killed," Bear replied. "If that military expedition had attacked the Crow camp and Dakota had died, they might have come after our cabin next, but that didn't happen," Catherine pointed out. "Because you chose to do what was right instead of what was easy." Bear nodded, understanding that his experience had changed him fundamentally. He had learned that honor sometimes required difficult choices, but that doing the right thing ultimately made the world safer for everyone. Over the following months, Bear maintained his friendship with the Crow tribe. He would occasionally visit their camp, bringing news from the outside world and helping to facilitate peaceful interactions between the tribe and white settlers in the region. Dakota recovered fully from his injuries and became a leader among his people, known for his wisdom in dealing with white authorities. He and Bear developed a close friendship that transcended cultural boundaries, united by their shared experience and mutual respect. Captain Morrison kept his word about reporting the encounter truthfully to his superiors. His account led to a change in military policy toward the Crow tribe, recognizing them as peaceful people who posed no threat to white settlements. When Bear and Catherine's son was born the following spring, they named him Thomas, but gave him the Crow name Little Bear, who brings peace in honor of the events that had shaped his father's understanding of justice and courage. Years later, when Thomas was old enough to understand, Bear would tell him the story of how a hunting accident had taught him the most important lesson of his life, that true strength comes not from the ability to inflict harm, but from the courage to help heal the harm we have caused. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of redemption, courage, and the power of doing what's right. Bear McKenzie's story reminds us that our worst mistakes can become opportunities for our greatest acts of heroism, and that honor knows no boundaries of race or culture. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this tale with others who need to hear about the transformative power of taking responsibility for our actions. Let us know in the comments what moment of this story inspired you most. The hunter who had wounded a tribesman through carelessness had become a bridge between two worlds, proving that honor and courage can transform enemies into brothers, and that sometimes our greatest failures lead to our most important victories. Bear McKenzie lived the rest of his life guided by the lesson he had learned in the Montana wilderness, that a man's true measure is not determined by his mistakes, but by his willingness to risk everything to make those mistakes right. The friendship between Bear and Dakota became legendary in the territory. inspiring others to look beyond racial and cultural differences to the common humanity that connects all people. Their story proved that honor, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for others can overcome even the deepest divisions and create lasting peace. Wind Runner served Bear faithfully for many years, and when the horse finally died of old age, Bear buried him on the hill overlooking Willow Creek with full honors, as befitted a gift from friends who had taught him the true meaning of brotherhood and courage. The Spotted Pony's grave became a place where Bear would go to remember the lessons he had learned, and to teach his children about the importance of standing up for what is right, regardless of the cost. And in the Montana Territory, the story of the hunter who wounded a tribesman and then risked everything to save him became a testament to the power of honor to transform lives and build bridges between different peoples. Controls Duchat Sonnet for